Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon, currently a postdoc at Princeton, and today I'd like to share some of the work from my dissertation done at UCLA. The title here is a little different from what's in your program since this is a rollover submission from last year, but this presentation is the newest, freshest version of this work, so hang around a couple minutes if you're interested in interpersonal communication and empathy. As many of us are familiar with, everyday human interaction involves sharing emotional personal stories. But this can be time-consuming and effortful, so we usually don't share it with just anyone. People like to disclose emotional narratives to others who are similar sorts of people, or who have gone through a similar experience. Past research has also shown that these sorts of people tend to empathize more with a speaker. However, while empathy motivates one to think about and help another person, empathizing doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the story in any particular way. In this study, we wanted to investigate whether personal and experience similarity also influence the way listeners construe emotional narratives. Specifically, might similarity make these construals more consistent or perhaps more idiosyncratic? To test this idea, we showed a sample of 119 college student participants 4 different videos in which a speaker told stories about various personal experiences involving various emotional themes. After each story, we asked the listeners to rate how similar the speaker seemed to them, how similar the story was to something they've experienced, and how much they empathized with the speaker of the story. Also, we measured how these listeners construed the stories in multiple ways. This included neural activity recorded with fNIRS while they watched the videos, retelling the story in as much detail as possible afterwards, rating their emotional reaction on the 10-item PANAS scale, and then rating on the same scale how they thought the speaker had felt both during the event itself and while retelling the story. Lastly, the participants watched each video again and gave continuous affect ratings for how positive and negative the content of the story was at each moment. We then calculated the similarity in each of these measures between each unique pair of listeners to see how consistently they construed the story, and if that construal consistency was related to the pair's personal or experience similarity ratings. This is a brief schematic on how we calculated similarity between these measures, but you can message me in chat or email me for more details about this. In our first analysis, we tried to replicate past research findings that listeners with more personal similarity to the speaker or experience similarity to the story would express greater empathy. And yes, we found that both kinds of similarity were significantly and positively related to how much the listeners empathized with the speaker. Next, we asked our construal question. Do participants with greater personal or experience similarity have more consistent empathic construals of the stories? Interestingly, we found that experience similarity was negatively associated with empathic construal consistency across almost all self-report measures. In other words, people who perceived greater similarity between this story and their own experience had more idiosyncratic construals of the story. The only exception we found was that listeners with high experience similarity had more similar emotional reactions. Personal similarity, on the other hand, had more measures that were positively related to construal consistency, specifically their story recall and inference about how the speaker felt when retelling the story. In the brain, we found that listeners with more experience similarity had more neural synchrony while watching the videos in language and perceptual processing areas. But they also had more neural idiosyncrasy in areas associated with attention direction and socio-emotional inference. In contrast, listeners with more personal similarity had more neural synchrony with each other in some social meaning-making areas. All of these results are controlling for a few measures of how engaged participants were in the task and how much empathy they expressed, so it seems like while people with personal and experience similarity make for more empathic listeners, experience similarity may lead to more idiosyncratic understandings of a story. We think this might be because interpersonal similarity could direct attention to some identity cues in a story, while experience similarity could trigger individualized personal memories that get in the way of encoding the narrative at hand, though these mechanisms would need to be explored in more research. Additional research on this question could help us understand who the best audience is for us to disclose to. That's it for this project, and thank you for stopping by. If you have any questions, I'll be hanging out in the chat box for this booth, and you can also email me at the address here on the screen. Hope you have a great rest of your conference.